Hi, everyone, for episode 67 of Retention Zone. I'm happy to have back from episode 9 and from New York, Pat Fitzgerald. Hey, Pat, how are you?
Hello, Carlo. Good to see you again, and thank you for inviting me back again.
Yeah, it's a long time, and today I want to focus on something that we kind of battle in the past together. Battle.
Yeah.
But first and foremost, even I'm not sure how many people remember every single episode. I want to be humble. So, who is Pat Fitzgerald for everybody?
So, thanks for having me, Carlos. So, just by way of background, my name is Pat Fitzgerald. I have been in subscription products for a very long time. I started in the business at SiriusXM radio in the US. I would call it one of the early OTT companies where we sold satellite radio subscriptions direct to consumer. So that's where I learned all about subscriptions and how to run that. And then after that, my path crossed with Carlo, thankfully, at NFL Game Pass International.
Yep.
And I've also run subscriptions at Better Collective's North American group, Action Network, and a few other brands. And now I am working as a product and digital strategy consultant in the US. I should also add that I was recruited to CNN to help with their CNN Plus product, which was a subscription product, very short-lived. And I did go on to work on CNN.com, but I guess it wasn't such a bad idea because they're bringing it back again. As the cable business is changing and evolving in the US, more content providers are looking to go direct to consumer, and CNN will be following that path again.
So, if you want the news of the fact that I want to go through with you, because you have a perfect vantage point on that. And again, we together, but you even more, live through, if you want, the issue that every app developer on the App Store, and I'm talking about Apple, iOS App Store, had until
3 weeks ago,
at least in the US. So what is that, and what happened exactly lately? You know the story better than I do.
By way of background, up until, again, very recently, within the last few weeks, any developer that was selling within the App Store would end up paying on an initial purchase, specifically 30% of revenue to Apple, just for being in the store. And Apple handled all the customer payments and actually the relationship with the customer based on the way that the apps were structured.
And
any app.
Can we go a bit in detail? So this was globally.
Correct.
So if you have an app that goes to, and it was exactly, what exactly were they managing? The payment?
They manage payments. The other thing, and as a marketer, this is also really challenging, is they actually manage the relationship within your app with the customer. So everything from email address to billing information, all of that was handled inside Apple, and the developer would only get back those things that Apple would sort of allow through. You get general usage metrics, but you get very little information about your users specifically from Apple.
If you have to do chargebacks, refunds,
chargebacks also done by Apple, and also because there was no sort of means to resolve any sort of customer dispute. By and large, any dispute would go in favor of the customer. So if you were a developer, right, and a customer questioned your renewal policy or had any sort of a billing question, by default, they would be able to. They would typically, quote, win that dispute, and money would be taken out. The other thing is just the delay in payments, right? So payments wouldn't come through sort of as you would if you had a direct billing relationship, where at most you would have a day or two before payments cleared. Apple would sort of pay on different cadences, so that becomes a challenge as well.
And let me sorry if I interrupt you when I said that you tell the story, but I want to go a bit deep in the in how it worked and how it normally works, a normal app developer would have at least an Android version of the app. So already everybody, but as we started with streaming, we would have 14 platforms, right?
Correct.
So for sure, you would have another way of getting payments for sure on the web.
Yes.
But you were not allowed to do what? Because I just want people to pay on the other
There's
side.
a number of restrictions that Apple put in place there. At one point, you weren't able to charge differentially between web and app, meaning that if Apple saw that you were charging less outside, they would suspend your app or disapprove your app. And then handling payments, and then any sort of cross-device. So as you're bringing up, Carlo, right? So if I'm an Apple user, right, and I purchase on the app, but then I was also trying to access that service via a connected television, I couldn't necessarily link those accounts because on the Apple side, you don't know exactly who that person is. So they would either buy a different version, or they would have to come up with some sort of a different payment process where you're trying to route users through a different payment mechanism. And the challenge there is obviously there's a lot of breakage in that flow. So
you couldn't promote.
That's a real challenge.
And you couldn't promote that you couldn't put a link to the web payment.
Absolutely not. That would be something that would get your app disapproved, immediately, or not approved for distribution within the App Store.
So this role of
this really handcuffed any develop, and we're talking about what I would call, forget about developers. We're talking about consumer brands, right?
Absolutely.
Brands like Spotify, brands like NFL Game Pass, which we were involved in, brands like Max, now HBO Max again, right? So all of these large brands that are delivering content through an iOS app, right, are bound by these restrictions, and also bound to Apple at that 30% rate, unless somehow they had enough leverage to negotiate that differently. But by and large,
because I think at a certain point you would go to 15%, right?
Yes, after 1 year, say, right? So after if a user renewed, after a year, you would get a benefit at 15%, or if you were over a certain revenue threshold, perhaps, or something like that.
Okay.
Right. But that's still significant, right? When you're looking at that really is a transaction cost that you would typically pay 3.5%, maybe 5%, which is still pretty high outside of Apple. That's what you're paying for transaction. And you're still doing marketing. You're still spending marketing costs. And even within the App Store, you could be doing paid advertising to try to get premium placement so that you're getting your app in front of folks. So in a lot of places, cost prohibitive for a lot of developers, cost prohibitive to market and sell within there, even though it was incredibly convenient for the user just to be able to sort of click on that. But it was an onerous cost, to say the least.
But then what happened?
I should say, still is outside of the United States. So so what's happened in the U.S. is in 2020. A company called Epic, which creates and produces Fortnite, a small video game,
exactly,
took Apple to court in the U.S. And said, we believe this is an antitrust or anti-competitive, right, position in the marketplace, and the court agreed. So the court ruled in favor of Epic to say that yes, these are these policies, right, and this structure is anti-competitive in the U.S. and in some ways monopolistic on the part of Apple. And I think that the spirit of this is that while yes, they may be entitled to some fee, right, that the value is being created by the app developer, right? If you create a good app, Apple's just benefiting off of that, even though they're providing that marketplace for that, and they are getting, an excessive amount of profit, given all the other things, and not letting developers pursue other means where they could save money in this way, or offer more competitive pricing. So the court rules in that. what happened subsequently is Apple really didn't pay attention to the court order. They were required to reduce certain things, and what they did was, I would say, less than the minimum required to adhere to the ruling. They put in things like scary roadblocks that say if you go off, you're paying somebody, and we can't guarantee the payment, et cetera, right? So they were basically putting a great deal of friction in front of users if that developer was trying to offer, let's call it, an alternative form of payment. What others might call more of a standard e-commerce transaction. So Apple was not complying with the court ruling. And over the last couple of weeks, the judge who is overseeing the case in appeals ruled that Apple was not adhering at all and that they needed to adhere immediately. So in the last few weeks, this is as of the end of April, beginning of May, all of these restrictions. And one of the other things that Apple did was they reduced the 30% to 27%, right? So,
again, doesn't seem in great good faith.
Phrase that in less polite ways. But the judge ordered that Apple bring down all of these barriers. And now what we're seeing are companies offering alternative forms of payment. So a couple of examples. In the US, Duolingo, a language app, they're now offering direct payment. I just recently signed up using this new flow, and I really love this. Patreon actually just created a new flow, and instead of having a small link at the bottom that says "link over here for other options," small print at the bottom is "link here to pay via the App Store." So they've reduced Apple's presence on their payment page, and essentially what you're doing is you're putting in credit card information or even Apple Pay. You can pay with Apple Pay. You're putting it into that. So they're offering alternative payment options within that. The value of that becomes tremendous. Obviously, they're getting more revenue. They're getting more of the share of revenue. That gives them more ability to offer discounts and other pricing options. You can still
have more control on the user.
What's that?
You're more control on the user, controlling in a good sense. You're more direct.
You're creating a more direct relationship with the user because you're getting information that you can then use to market back to them or communicate with them. And obviously you're getting a much greater share of revenue now, right? You're going to pay more standard or traditional transaction costs.
So if you have, take streaming and take a global player in streaming, which is what we done different, and we were working on one significant together which means almost 200 countries or however you define regions, different taxation. So you definitely need, so if you try to do it yourself, it's a disaster, obviously. You need what is called a merchant of record, someone that has a system that can manage all the differences and put it all together. Because, as you said, at the end, you need all the entitlements, because even if I pay on web, still need to be able that my iOS app recognize it's me. I have this kind of subscription, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Correct.
So that's become even more crucial, because if you're not going through
depending
Apple,
on how you look at it and what your perspective is it going to incur additional complexity in some cases? Yes. I would say that if you have a large business in the US, this is a windfall, right? So you're going to figure out a way, right, to be able to take advantage of those direct payments in the US. The problems existed before, Carlo, right? So, if you recall, and even at Game Pass, right, we sort of had a couple of different systems, right, where we had our users that signed up via the web, sort of we knew who they were, and then we had iOS, and we had to do some things to sort of identify, those users from an entitlement process. But from payments and then managing SKUs and all of those things, it was still quite challenging, in the system. What I think now happens is, at least in the US, whereas, it was shifting even more. I mean, you could have, in the last business I was in, we used to have, sort of a third of subscribers being managed, directly from, say, a web. We would have 2/3 on iOS. That will start to switch.
Yeah.
And you'll have companies like Kling and Stripe, Zuora potentially, and others that now can do a better job of managing an overall subscriber base, right? And then give you more flexibility around lots of things, including things like churn management and win back and other things where you can be much more proactive because you know who those customers are and when their terms are.
But in that, so I understand what you described before, that you go now to Duolingo and it's a bigger button, just to simplify it, for the out of Apple payment. Do you think companies with that scenario, 75 or whatever, 70-30, will try to move the existing 70 to the 30 somehow? Because you need to, how do you convince me to, it doesn't change anything for me. How do you convince me?
Yes. I think they will do that because the upside is so high, right? Because you can recapture so much of the revenue. What Apple does make it difficult to do is manage billing for customers, especially around renewal. So what happens with when you're on the iOS platform from a subscription perspective is, and because you don't have this information, you don't know that the user canceled or suspended. So for example, if I buy a year, right, I can pre-cancel, right, 1 year in advance, right? So I don't get that recurring payment.
I've done it last week. For
everybody. Most people do that, right? But the challenge, and again, now flip your perspective from that of a consumer to that of a subscription marketer, right? If I know that user is, and whether or not they, I'm not disputing the fact that they can cancel forward, right? But if I know that they're going to cancel forward, or I know that they have canceled forward, I will market to them to try to win them back. I will provide them discounts. I will give value for them to come back. In the Apple scenario, I don't know that they canceled that until that term is up, and then they're gone, right, already. So I do think that there'll be value for companies to actually go out and at some point, right, if somebody stops renewing or whatever, make an additional offer, try to get them to come back and get them to come back via that alternative mechanism. Because even if they do lose some subscribers, given the change in revenue, it will be worth losing some to be able to have the direct relationship with others.
But to be honest, the cancel forward is also a protection as a consumer perspective. I forgot, and then I will get hit with this huge 1 year bill that I forgot that would come. So,
which results also, right, in those disputes that we talked about, and an unwind, right, of that, right? And I'm not. This is not to restrict users from doing that. I do think that is now expected, and that even if you have a direct billing relationship, that's something that should be offered. But as long as a marketer, I know who that user is, right, then I can offer them additional value to come back. You could take a year off, right? But maybe the following year come back. Whereas in the iOS environment, it's very difficult to figure out who that user is and to go out and find them and market to them, right? So
at the end of the story, this is a good thing.
I think it's a great thing. I think it's a great thing if you're marketing subscriptions. I do think it will ultimately add value because some of that value will translate to consumers, right? The other thing, and I'll say this in the retention zone, when I started marketing subscriptions and when I was with, early on with SiriusXM, we had very low churn. We did a lot of things to protect ourselves. At the end of the day, customers sort of stuck with us. I think where we are now with the number of subscriptions we all have, right? It had become also more of a consumable as well, where I want this for a period of time. If it's a streaming service, I want it for a show or two shows. And when that show, I've watched it all, I may cancel that, and then I may come back again. Customers will do that on their own, but if you have the ability to market to them, you can offer them discounts. They can get additional value out of that, and it just does help smooth the relationship, and ultimately consumers will see value in it as well.
It's not only good because it's a 30%, even if you may have to spend a bit more to do certain things.
Yeah.
But it's also good because it adds transparency to the marketing relationship, if you want.
Correct. Well, yes,
Okay.
it helps the marketer, right? But ultimately, I think it will that difference, right? Let's call it between the transaction fee, what a normal fee would be, right? And 27%, if I'm being generous, that some of that value will come back in terms of to the consumer as well.
Okay, let's see when the rest of the world will pick up. But I see, I don't know, maybe Europe could be.
I would think that the EU is probably watching this very closely. There certainly are going to be a number of developers out there that are going to be very, very interested in this.
Yeah. Thank you for the masterclass.
Let's also be realistic, Carlo. Apple's not going to lay down on this. There's still a battle or two to be fought, even all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. Yeah. So we'll see how.
Because it looks almost like a tariff, and I want to end it there. Don't enter in any discussion.
You won't get any here.
Va bene. Thank you for the masterclass, Pat.
Oh, are you
really
kidding?
Nice having you back.
Opportunity, Carlo. As always, I enjoy it.
Va bene. Grazie. Ciao, Pat.
Ciao. Okay.